Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this very cold, miserable first winter night in Charleston. I told Olivier that he's going to have a lot of whiffs of mothballs as we're all pulling out our winter clothes from their storage over the summer. My name is Angela Mack, and I'm Executive Director of the Gibbes Museum of Art, and it's a pleasure to have you with us this evening for our 5th annual Distinguished Lecture Program. With the generous support of former Gibbes board member Esther Ferguson, our mission for this series is to bring outstanding, world-renowned artists, art collectors, architects, museum leaders, philanthropists, and art historians to Charleston annually to stimulate public discussion about creativity in the visual arts. On the heels of our recent blockbuster exhibition from the Guggenheim Museum, featuring a fabulous example of Picasso's work, and last year's amazing lecture by Jeff Koons, who references Picasso as a major influence on his career, it seems fitting that tonight we present to you author, filmmaker, television and music producer, art consultant, and international lawyer, Olivier Picasso, who will provide us with a unique and intimate perspective on his grandfather, Pablo. Olivier Widmer Picasso was born to Pierre Widmer, a naval officer, and Maya Picasso, daughter of Pablo Picasso and Marie-Therese Walter, a muse and his partner from the late 1920s to the late 1930s. He is the author of several books on Picasso, including the internationally acclaimed 2014 biography entitled Picasso Intimate Portrait. Olivier was notably involved in the 2016 Sotheby's promotion of Femme Assise, beautiful painting which sold for a record-breaking $63,700,000. He serves as a consultant for the Picasso administration, the family organization that manages the rights on Picasso's name, works of art, and images of the artist. As a television personality, Olivier has produced and hosted numerous programs for French National Public Television that has included interviews with great creative minds such as Renzo Piano, Karl Lagerfeld, and Jeff Koons, to name a few. Recently, he hosted Stolen Treasures, and I haven't seen this series. It makes me a little nervous. It's a new television series about the 8 most famous art robberies in French museums. You can see why I'm a little nervous. Olivier has received numerous awards for his various productions and was awarded the recognition of Chevalier, an Officer of Arts and Letters by the French government in 2011 and 2016, respectively. I want to take a moment to thank those who have made this evening possible, beginning with the Gibbes board members who serve with Esther on our Distinguished Lecture Committee. They are Alice Wyatt, Lou Hammond, Dr. David Adams, Shannon Gillespie, Deborah Kennard, Mark Munn, and Catherine Smith. We are deeply grateful for our generous sponsors, especially our lead corporate sponsor, U.S. Trust Bank of America, which has supported this program since its inception. The City of Charleston, Andrea Volpe, the Samuel Freeman Charitable Trust, the Post and Courier, and all of our premium ticket holders, all of whom had the opportunity to have an intimate lunch with Olivier this afternoon at Charleston Grill. It was really quite lovely. Finally, my sincere appreciation to Anya Kelly and her team here at the College of Charleston Satilli Theater and the terrific hardworking staff at the Gibbes, particularly Leslie Stever, Jennifer Ross, Megan Hoffman, Amanda Breen, Wendy Ammons, Becca Heister, Mandy Ronick, Courtney Soler, and everyone else who has been helpful this evening to make it possible. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Esther Ferguson, who will say a few words about our speaker. A native of Hartsville, South Carolina, Esther's love for art began when she was a student at the University of South Carolina, where she received her bachelor's degree in political science and art history. She spent her early career in New York conducting research for the American Health Foundation and serving in leadership roles for Think Group and the Carlisle Consulting Corporation. In South Carolina, she fostered the Broadcast Resource Center and hosted the South Carolina educational television program called Review. She has founded the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University and the College of Charleston Spanish Studies program at Trujillo, Spain. Esther is the recipient of 6 honorary doctorates. Esther has resided in Charleston for over 30 years and has been a champion for the visual arts as a collector, advocate, and philanthropist. She is the inspiration behind our distinguished lecture series. Please welcome Esther Ferguson.
This is obviously a special night for me. This is year number 5. I sometimes can't believe it when I look back over the numbers and the people that we have brought to Charleston. Angela and I have been a team during this whole time. Sometimes people don't even realize that it took us 4 years to get Jeff Koons here. But today, this is a very special night for me because I get to tell you that for 30 years, my husband and I got to live with the magnificent Picasso. Her name was Jacqueline, the last wife of Pablo Picasso. In fact, he painted her more than all the other wives combined. They lived in La Californie in the south of France. Jacqueline was sitting in the very famous rocking chair that Pablo Picasso painted so many times during his life. And then when Olivier and I got together and realized that we had so many people in common, it was a magical time for us today. When Olivier arrived on the scene, he opened his heart. You will see tonight a very open, lovely, warm, gentle human being who has followed his grandfather and in the most extraordinary ways. He has 3 degrees, including a law degree. And during that time, he interviewed Jeff Koons. Now, many of you in this audience remember that he was our last speaker here. And during that interview with Jeff Koons told Olivier that given my life again, I would love to have been Picasso. Very interesting. Picasso was known to say that when he met Henri Matisse, that he would like to have been Matisse. Tonight, you're going to meet someone who is truly gifted in his own right. He is a prolific writer and producer of television programs. You are in for a very big, special night tonight. For me, it is one of my most memorable moments. I look forward to seeing you afterwards. And his books are right at the front door. So go and get a wonderful signed copy by Olivier Picasso. Tonight, Picasso's grandson, Olivier Picasso.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I deserve so much for the moment. We will see this in less than an hour. I would like to thank you very much for being so many tonight, despite of the difficult climate condition. It's not very nice for me. I wanted to visit Charleston, but not under an umbrella, so I will be back. Tonight, we're gonna see how we can understand why Picasso is Picasso. In fact, we know his talents, we know his artworks all over the world in so many museums, galleries, foundations, and at homes of private collectors. But Pablo Picasso has a special link with the audience. It's beyond the art enthusiast and specialist. He is someone close to everybody. I am used to say that I have a grandfather, but I share this grandfather with everybody, because not only his name, but his face have become so familiar that his name himself is a common word. Who told about his child, okay, he draws like Picasso. And my grandfather himself used to say that it took him 60 years to draw like a child. It's true. But beyond the talent, the incredible talent, there is an image. And I think that tonight we're going to try to understand why Picasso is Picasso. And I have a little video to show you. This is the only interview of Pablo Picasso with his voice, because whatever is so famous, he avoided to be in front of a microphone during all his life. You can imagine that he has been interviewed by many journalists, but he didn't want to have a tape recorder, probably because he was explaining that his artworks were his words and that anyone could find the meaning he wanted. It's very unusual for someone so famous to have appeared only one time on a TV interview in the late 60s for a Belgian journalist. Oh, if we can see it right now.
Et si on n'aurait pas de chance, je crois que j'aimerais même un bouton de porte, n'est-ce pas, un pot de chambre, n'importe quoi.
Est-ce que vous aimez la télévision aussi? Pas tellement.
J'y allais.
Oui.
J'ai commencé un jour parce qu'il y avait le mariage de la princesse Marguerite et quelqu'un m'a prêté un appareil. Alors j'ai vu le défilé de la princesse Marguerite et j'ai continué après.
Vous savez, ce qui serait formidable quand on vous a devant les caméras de télévision, ce serait de vous laisser tout seul en liberté. Vous seriez tellement capable de faire des choses formidables pour les téléspectateurs. Vous leur inventeriez des choses.
Mais probablement. Des fois, je trouve des choses magnifiques à la télévision, mais des choses très jolies que j'aime, qui m'intéressent. Mais des fois épouvantable. Je le dis, mais parce qu'on est là tous les deux tout seuls. Ah non, c'est pas vrai, car tout le monde m'écoute.
Est-ce que si vous deviez choisir vous-même l'époque, la peinture, la toile qui devrait vous survivre, quelle serait cette toile, quelle serait cette période?
Je ne sais pas, c'est difficile. C'est fait avec des intentions tellement du moment, de l'époque et de l'état dans lequel tout le monde et moi nous nous trouvons, que c'est très difficile. Au moment de Guernica, j'ai fait Guernica, n'est-ce pas? C'était une grande catastrophe, même le commencement de beaucoup d'autres que nous avons suivis, n'est-ce pas? Mais enfin, c'est comme ça. C'est personnel, n'est-ce pas? Au fond, sont des mémoires qu'on s'écrit soi-même.
He was repeating what I was telling you, that all his artworks are his words. But my relationship with my grandfather is quite bizarre because it started, for me, the day it finished for him. I mean, I discovered the death of my grandfather on television. So from the day one, my link to Pablo Picasso was through the public image. And within days, I've been given answers to questions I never wondered about him, about his life, his loves, his children, the family, the success in the West with the USA, but also in the East with the former USSR. And this connection I had with my grandfather with the public image and with television had been something bizarre because whatever he was familiar at the house, at my parents' place with his paintings, his drawings, his sculptures, some photos, he was a kind of unknown person in my life. I was not interested because I was a child. I was more interested in going to school or play soccer. And on his side, he was living only for creation. In the last years of his life, he was totally devoted to being in his studio, asking not to be disturbed, and probably giving a last period to the long list of artworks and periods he had in his life. But nothing was easy. If you do remember, Pablo Picasso was born in Malaga, in the south of Spain. His father was a drawing teacher. He was surrounded by his mother, his two sisters, so he was a little king in this little kingdom. And he was talented, to a point that his father thought that he could be a very good drawing teacher too. But it was different, because Pablo was more talented than anyone, and at the age of 7, 8, 9 or 10, he was already achieving artworks that only a mature teenager or students at a school of fine arts will achieve. He was bored when at School of Fine Arts, of course, in Madrid or Barcelona, because everything was easy, was very easy, and this is why the family understood it was necessary to support him, especially his uncle, who paid the scholarship for him to keep on. But at the same time, Pablo was thinking about probably becoming a drawer, a painter for rich people and some bourgeois. At the same time, the world was changing with some artists like Renoir, Cézanne, or Monet. The representation of art was very different. It was not yet the art market, but it was already something different than just painting for academies, for museums. This is why for Pablo, as a young man, the future was no more in Spain, no more in the school, but in the real life. And the real life was apparently in Paris. I speak about this coincidence because when Pablo left Malaga to go to Paris in 1900, it was in a third-class coach on a train, nearly 3 days to go from the south of Spain to Paris. So it's just to tell you that he was absolutely moneyless. But he was full of ambition and full of hope. He wanted to be a painter. It had to be in Paris. The first years in Paris, the first journeys in Paris in 1900 and 1902 were full of joy. And the paintings that you may know are showing the happy Paris, the cabarets, and the artists. But when he decided in 1904 to go back to Paris, it was to settle down. And this is why you see the difference on his paintings. We were no more in the happy life, but in the blue period. And the blue period is not only because most of the paint that he was using was blue, it's because life was cold, he was without money, and he was very isolated. Did he stop? No. He stayed in Paris, he stayed, discovered another way to be happy with other artists at his atelier called the Bateau Lavoir, which was formerly a kind of laundry place with no central heating and no fresh air in summer. But Pablo was very optimistic about the future. And the future maybe was this. I mean, something which made his friends totally mad at him, saying, "What is this? What is it?" But Pablo in 1905 visited the Museum of Prime Arts, we say tribal art in Paris, Musée de l'Homme, and discovered all those wooden sculptures, African wooden sculptures, and he understood that something was different, that painting was not only to be beautiful or to show the reality, but probably to show something beyond. And by studying in his atelier, without money, still very alone and probably very cold, he made the Demoiselle of Avignon that you've just seen, which is today the masterpiece of the MoMA in New York and probably the act of creation of modern art. In the same year, 1905, when he went to his museum, which inspired him so much, he was also discovering the success of another painter, older than him, called Matisse. And Pablo was impressed by the success, by the image, more than the talent. And Pablo decided that he wanted to be Matisse. He became Picasso. And I would like to make a pause here because I had the same conversation with Jeff Koons 2 years ago when doing a TV documentary with him. And he was insisting about showing me his collection of paintings. Jeff Koons has 7 paintings of Picasso, including The Kiss, which is a very dramatic painting. And he told me, "I do remember when Pablo Picasso died." I said, "Oh, yes?" He said, "Yes, I was in York at the School of Fine Art, and I remember that we've been told that Pablo Picasso died." And he said, "The impact was so big around me, was so big in the medias, in television, that he said on that day, I want to be Picasso." And he became Jeff Koons. So you see, watch out around yourself when you see someone, maybe will be the next master artist. When I was showing you the first years of Pablo in Paris, when he was, in fact, building the Cubism, he was at the same time wondering about himself and about his name, because he understood that Pablo's name is Pablo Ruiz Picasso. In Spain, when a man and a woman get married, the tradition is to take half of the name of the husband and half of the name of the wife. So José Ruiz Blasco married Maria Picasso, and it became the couple Ruiz Picasso. This is why Pablo was Ruiz Picasso, and because of that, he was signing these first paintings by his full name. But he understood that Ruiz Picasso was probably too ethnic. Maybe at that time, all the Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese people were migrating to France. He wanted to be different and to have same kind of success as Matisse. And he noticed that Picasso with two S was, in a way, very close to Matisse with two S too. This is how he asked his mother if he could use only a name and to apologize to his father by just changing his identity. And without the word existing at that time, I must say that in terms of marketing, using Picasso alone was a great decision. I'll let you think about Ruiz. It would have been different, even for me. At the same time, at the beginning of the 19th century, there was something which was more popular, the photography. In fact, in the late years of 1880, 1890, the development of photography was very, very difficult for painters. And Pablo thought at a moment that photography will destroy the painting. But Pablo was a man who each time he was discovering a technique, wanted to understand it, maybe to take power over it. And this is how, in 1905, 1906, Pablo Picasso experienced photography with himself. Today we will speak about selfies, but they were not selfies. They were self-portraits of himself, posing, for example, and just trying to understand how photography could add something to traditional art like painting or drawings. And in fact, he got very instinctively that image was part of the success, and that it would be necessary to be very cautious with the image, his image. So at that time, of course, with not so much money, not so many cameras, and probably not so many photographers, Pablo was using a remote trigger or mirrors to photograph himself. And this is the first step of getting an image after getting a name. It was the first step to control an image. And I must say that if you look at all the pictures of Pablo Picasso during his life, and we will talk about the one in the 20s, 30s, 50s, 60s, he has a very, very natural instinct to pose. In fact, one time, one very famous director said that Pablo Picasso was probably the best actor because he was the one to decide when and where and what not to say. So he was the best actor, controlling himself, his image. Then, as I told you, after the image, the name, there was a product, and the product was already the Cubism. Cubism was a way to create innovation, and all his life, my grandfather has been an innovating person. He was the first artist in art history to combine different, medium, I don't say in English if I'm right, so like this, which is a masterpiece today in the Museum Picasso in Paris, an artwork that he kept all his life. You can see that he was mixing paint with a cord, with a real chair cover, and you understand where we are. We are in a cafe. Everything is on the canvas. He was the first artist to experience this, and he did it many times in the following years, preparing himself not only his identity, but also his posterity. Because at the same time Pablo was creating artworks, he was also documenting his career. I mean, he has been very cautious in keeping all the details, all the sketches, all the books, and eventually even all the little things of every day. And this is why when he died, the family had to manage 200,000 pieces of archives, which were added to the artworks themselves of the estate. And all the archives were given then to the Museum Picasso in Paris because Pablo was the one who wanted to document its production, which shows that he knew from a very early age that his talent was not normal, that something was not religious, but probably sacralized. He had this feeling that this talent had to be exercised and that he had a mission. In the first part of his presence in Paris, I would say that Cubism was the most visible example of his talent. But the second part of his stay in Paris, I would say from 1910 to 1920, he became someone famous among the artistic world. And in fact, he moved from Montmartre, the north of Paris, to Montparnasse, always following the places where he felt something was happening. And in this second part of the beginning of the 20th century, the thing which is the most noticeable is probably the collaborations. Of course, in the first part, at Bateau Lavoir in Montmartre, Pablo had worked on Cubism with Georges Braque. But with collaborations in the 1910s years, he moved to a next step, which was probably making him a leader in the artistic plan, and collaborations were very important because you will understand why after Cubism we moved to another important word, an artistic word of the 20th century. What you see is a curtain of a show on stage called Parade. And Parade was the idea of Diaghilev, which was a choreographer and the chef of the Ballet Russe, the Russian ballets. And he wanted to create a show with the music of Erik Satie. And when you consider all the people which have been involved into this production, it's absolutely crazy because not only you have, of course, Diaghilev, which was extremely famous at that time with the Ballet Russe, the Russian ballet, but you have also Pablo Picasso asked for the costumes and for the curtains. You have Jean Cocteau for the lyrics. You have the choreography by Léonide Massine and a poem by Guillaume Apollinaire. So at that time, in 1917, it was the best group ever possible of modernity. And it was so modern that when they played it in June 1917, the ballet Parade, this is Massine with Picasso, it was not a success. It was a huge scandal, something to remember that probably no one has seen before and barely since. And on that evening, this absolutely impressive ballet with a lot of creativity in the costume and in the music, someone say that it was surrealist. And this is how the word surrealist was invented again with Picasso in the surroundings. So let's say that he moved from a name to a fame among the people of the art world, and the art world at that time was mostly in Paris. At the end of this decade, just before 1920, Pablo Picasso married with Olga, that he met among the Ballet Russe, the Russian ballet. And then he met, just after the First World War, two important persons that probably changed his destiny. They were two art dealers, Rosenberg and Wildenstein, and they made a deal with Pablo. In fact, they were sure that Pablo would be a big success in America, and they said, we're going to be your dealers, and one will take care of Europe, and Wildenstein will take care of America. And this is how the USA discovered, probably after the Russian and German collectors who have been the first ones in the beginning of the century. This is how probably America discovered Picasso, and Picasso became the cherished son of modernity for American people. In the 20s, there was a project. It It was called the Museum of Modern Art. And Alfred Barr, his first director, really decided that Pablo Picasso should be the symbol of modernity. And this is how, which I call a stratospheric input, Pablo Picasso became the celebrity of the modernity thanks to America. At the same time, in Russia, after the revolution, all the large paintings collected by Russian collectors became the secret of the Bolshevik revolution, and before Picasso became an iconic communist person. So these are during the 20s, some paintings important. The portrait of Olga, 1923. The portrait of Paul, my uncle, and he was born in 1921. And, of course, a little bit later, in 1927, was my grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, in the south of France. After Pablo experienced a very, very socialite life in Paris with Olga, he was probably tired of a situation which was putting him outside of his studio. And at the same time, he met a young woman in front of the Galeries Lafayette in Paris in January 1927, and it was Marie-Thérèse. And at that time, it took him to a new period of his creation, and probably a new period also of his love life. When meeting Marie-Thérèse, my grandfather told her, "You and I, we're going to make great things together." She was a bit confused. She was very young, and he was very determined, and no one knows if it was on a personal plan or on the artistic plan. Apparently, it was on both. And it's interesting because at that time, Pablo was trying to show her that he was important. So he had a book, a Japanese book, and it was written in Japanese, Picasso. So he tried to explain to her, "I am important, this is my name," and she did not know Picasso. She didn't know who he was. She was just a young woman in a Parisian life, but nothing more. So it shows that Pablo, whatever could be a star or a rising star in America, was still only known by the artistic community on the left bank or the right bank, but not by the general audience, by the public. And this is during those years that after having a name, after having what I said, a fame among the artistic community, having success with money, that Pablo has created a style. Let's say the famous Picasso style, the one that most of the people know, like this portrait of my grandmother called The Dream, which is today, by the way, in Paris for a retrospective called Picasso 1932, because in 1932, it's important, it's linked to this exploration of success. Pablo got his first retrospective in Paris, and it was the first time that he was showing its production of the past 30 years. The blue period, the pink period, the cubist years, the neoclassic years, and, bizarrely, new paintings that he has hidden for the past 5 years of someone new, a blonde woman, and not the dark-haired wife, Olga. And it was probably on that day, on the 16th of June, 1932, that Pablo Picasso established his most popular style, what we can call the surrealist years, but we can define this period by two names. Marie-Thérèse, of course, and Dora Maar, a photographer and artist he made in the mid-30s. And he always played between the two women, Marie-Thérèse being the kind of muse, a kind of blonde woman, voluptuous, and Dora Maar being the intellectual, very, very tense, always in a very complicated situation. And as you can see, Dora Maar was a sophistication of the intellectual woman, while Marie-Thérèse was just the voluptuous muse. And next week, by the way, you know that in America, the fall season is important for the auction sales. And next week in New York, there will be a Marie-Thérèse portrait, a very classical Marie-Thérèse portrait of the 30s for sale at Sotheby's, and there will be a very important portrait of Dora Maar for sale at Christie's. So be prepared for some record, and again, those two women are fighting for records, no more for Pablo. Of course, the Second World War and all those events in Europe are very important for Pablo Picasso image. Here you can see the moment Pablo was painting Guernica. You know that Guernica was asked by the Spanish government for the Spanish pavilion at the World Fair in Paris in 1937. Pablo had a project of a painting illustrating the woman. Marie-Thérèse was a model for that. And suddenly there was the attack of the village of Guernica in Spain, an attack, the first time, an attack of civilian populations by airplanes, and in this case, airplanes provided by the Nazi regime. So Pablo was absolutely horrified, and he decided to change his project to become Guernica, a celebration of atrocity against civil population. So he asked Dora Maar to photograph the painting, and it's the first time in history that that a work in progress was pictured by a photographer. So again, it's very interesting because Pablo had the idea that it was very important to show the different phases of his painting, especially because this bombing of Guernica was made in different phases. So he could change some figures on the painting, even if you see that the image of Marie-Thérèse is very visible on the canvas. This was the first time that Pablo was really involved in politics and became famous for his engagement. Of course, it was 1937, few years before the big World War II, and the fact that two blocks were now fighting, the West and the East. It's important to speak about those years, and especially the end of the World War II, because when you imagine that there was a kind of conflict above Germany and France, above Italy and Germany against the rest of the world, not to mention Japan, there was, of course, a zone of influence between America and between Russia, USSR. And on the day of the liberation of Paris, in August 25th of 1944, the American soldiers had a list of things to do, to go to visit Notre Dame, the Champs-Élysées, the French girls, probably, dancing, and visit Picasso. And Pablo was absolutely astonished to discover that there were soldiers queuing down his building just to take a picture with him. And I don't know if we're going to see a picture just after those ones. So this is my mother, Albert Einstein, visiting in New York an exhibition of Pablo. This is an example. You see, this painting was in my dining room at home when I was a child, but Pablo kept it and offered it to my mother. But you can see that the soldier thought it was very funny to put his rifle and his helmet just to take a picture. Ernest Hemingway was visiting Pablo Picasso and left him some grenades, you say? Grenades as a souvenir. Pablo was very surprised, but it shows that people in America, they were very aware of the importance of Pablo Picasso and how he stayed in Paris during the war. Didn't leave. Pablo faced the enemy, even because he was Spanish and he was supposed to be neutral, but also because he wanted to stay and fight against the occupant. So it means that after the Second World War, the world was in a new era. And this new era was that there was a new press. the news press, the magazines like Life magazine, for example, in America, or Paris Match in France. And this was a new coincidence that Pablo was already very famous in America, very famous all over Europe as an artist, as a man with some political ideas. But at the same moment, he was facing the creation of a new type of media, the news magazine. And Pablo, by having such a fame, being already a rich man, known for his different wives and companions, was a perfect image for those magazines. This is a portrait of François Gillot, his companion of just after the Second World War, and as a paramount, Pablo was already 60-something, and François Gillot was 25. They got children. So the man on the beach, the powerful artist, already in the middle age, was a young and proud father of two beautiful children, a little boy, Claude, born in 1947, and Paloma, born in 1949. So at that point, Pablo Picasso was pictured every day when he was on the beach or when he was working. And he was also at the same time discovering a new technique, the ceramics. And he was the first artist in the history of ceramics to transform pots into sculptures and to add paint on them. And this is how the little village of Valeris, when there was probably 3 ceramic galleries, was transformed into a kingdom of ceramics. And I remember when I was a child, there was something like 400 shops in ceramic instead of 300 before Picasso. It's important. In fact, in the 50s, and you see a lot of pictures of Pablo showing himself without a word, as usual, showing himself how he was creating ceramics, how he was drawing. He became a pop star, a popular star. I mean, probably before the singers and other dancers and reality show stars of today, Pablo was extremely famous, probably because his image as a young father, a young lover, but also a man of experience. He became a pop star, and people were friendly with Picasso because the image of Pablo was always nice, easy. And you've seen the difference between the pictures of the 20s in his 3-piece tailored suits, and now just with a pair of shorts. He was moving from the old image of the bourgeois to the image of the young person of after the war, of the what I call the American years, because the American culture was very important in the second part of the 20th century, not only about art and the creation of the American references and the pop art, but also about the lifestyle. The lifestyle after the Second World War was mostly American, more than anything. And Pablo had a pair of shorts, chinos. This is, in the 50s, this was the moment Pablo was also part of a very incredible experience. It was a movie that the French director, Georges-Henri Clouzot, offered to Pablo to do. And the star will be Picasso, the story will be Picasso, and the movie will be called The Mystery Picasso, or The Mystery of Picasso. The idea at that time was for the director to use transparent canvas, and some of them with a kind of nylon, and to have Pablo to draw on one side, and so you could be in front of the pure creation, trying to understand how Pablo was able to transform a bird into a fish, a castle into a carriage, a landscape into a woman. And in fact, again, it was the first time that such an experience was made with an artist. And at the end of the movie called The Mystery Picasso, it was still a mystery, because no one could understand how such a creativity could be the one of one person only. You see some pictures of Pablo during the 50s, going to corrida with Jacqueline, which is the woman on his left. And behind, you see the children. My mother is just behind him with handkerchief, and there is Paloma on one side, Claude. And you can see this is a public image of Picasso. So even if the creations were in museums or collection, Pablo was outside with the people. And this created probably the most incredible link between an artist and an audience, even if people were not understanding why he was drawing this way or sculpting this way. But it was really, it's interesting. And I did not mention earlier that probably because of this public image, the Communist Party took advantage to convince artists to join the party. And Pablo took his card in 1944, just at the end of the Second World War. But you have to understand that in France, for example, 25% of the population was voting for communists. It was not marginal. And Pablo was just choosing the Communist Party as a form of humanism, and he was probably inspired by the propaganda of the Soviet Union. Except that in the 50s, there were more and more rumors about the Stalin regime, and Pablo, without saying that the Communist Party was not a good thing, was more and more putting distance with the party, offering just money once a year. And it's interesting that he was always faithful to some people he trusted once, but he was also logical with himself. These are images from the movie. So you have to imagine that the camera was on the other side. And in fact, I kept this picture because there is no word in this movie. Pablo is only showing his creativity. But at the end, he says, okay, that's finished. It was probably very frustrating for the director to have more words about creation. And it's funny. It was a way for him to do jokes. And if you consider that at the end of the 50s, I said that Pablo was a pop star, was everywhere, he had probably found in the way not to make any comment, not any interview, not any public word recorded, he had probably found a way to create an international language, because by not giving the idea that he was more Spanish or French or maybe trying to speak English, he was just giving the whole world his artworks, creating the Picasso language. And in fact, without words, it's like a universal language to talk about Picasso. That's it. This is Picasso. It works in every language, everywhere, with every generation. You are seeing some pictures of the late 50s in Cannes. Pablo always thought that documenting his work was important, including pictures. And he was very clever in trying to help young photographers by providing them with cameras and providing them with a subject, himself. This is why you have so many pictures. One of the most famous is David Douglas Duncan, who was a GI, a war photographer, and who is still alive. And David Douglas Duncan, who is in France now, is more than 100 years. And I can tell you that he's very vivid. And I remember a few years ago having a little fight about copyrights for one of my TV documentary, and he was mad, and he talked to me the way a GI talked to an enemy. I was very surprised at the age of 96 at this time. I was thinking, wow, I hope he doesn't have a gun. It was on the phone. In the 60s, after Pablo was always posing, as you can see, instinctively with good ideas, this was with an American actor who was visiting him and giving him a gun. So in the 60s, it was visible that Pablo Picasso was 80 years old and that the young generation was no more considering Pablo Picasso as a contemporary artist. He was a modern artist, and he was already part of history. And Pablo was absolutely not counting in periods or time. In fact, he never called himself a period cubist or surrealist or blue or red or blue or pink. These are the names given by specialists and art dealers. So for Pablo in the 60s, there was absolutely not the end of a period and no new period. This is why he was keeping working, asking his wife, Jacqueline, not to be bothered and to be left alone in his studio where he was still trying to find something. And I think, for I said, that he was trying to find a kind of eternity. Was it possible for a painter to stay alive more and more? And apparently, by the fact that he died at the age of 91, painting was helping. I'm not sure for everybody, but for Pablo Picasso it helped. So in the final years, in the 60s, it appeared that Pablo Picasso was a kind of old-fashioned, a painter of the past. It was without counting on his creativity, because just in the years of 62 and 63, he made more than 200 portraits of Jacqueline, beautiful ones, because Pablo was always finishing every artwork. He did also the series of historical paintings. He did 26 versions of the Déjeuner sur l'herbe. I don't know the translation in English. It's probably a lunch outside by Monet. And it showed he was really, really active. And he did also the series of Musketeers. All this was totally hidden, and it was revealed only in 1970 when Pablo organized himself an exhibition in Avignon in what is called the Palais des Papes, which is an enormous palace of the popes, where he showed his last creations. And again, it was not a success, it was a new scandal. Not because it was half naked, but because he was showing huge sizes of paintings with a lot of paint colors, everything, a lot of controversy, naked people, sex, and he created a new period, what we call the last years of Picasso, including, for example, Musketeers like this. To me, those important paintings where the color of the paint is really on the canvas like crazy everywhere. I see a link with an artist which will start a few years after called Basquiat. And I think that Picasso was finding a way to make a link with the contemporary world, including, for example, Basquiat and the same kind of use of colors and figures. If you consider all this life with both steps from fame to celebrity to success, and if you consider that today the name of Pablo Picasso is part of daily news, exhibitions all over the world, auction records, success of exhibition, you consider that Pablo Picasso has probably moved from what is a simple celebrity to posterity. And in fact, when you consider posterity, you must understand that the 8th of April 1973 was just a detail. And what was the end for him and the beginning for me, to understand my grandfather, it's nothing if we compare that the past 40, 45 years have been confirming that Pablo Picasso is probably one of the most important painters of the history of art, and that he has made himself his image. In fact, he understood that in our 20th century, where the media have emerged as very important part of our information, Pablo Picasso has understood what was the image, and he was probably the one to control it to a point that you have an artist which has made probably 8,000 paintings, 60,000 drawings and everything. He has 10 museums in the world bearing his name, and you just have few words that you've listened to on the video. So I would say that today, Picasso name is probably a brand. The Picasso face is an image that you can see in some advertising sometimes. But in fact, Picasso is ours. We all share a piece of this artist, and I think that I'm just a detail in his life and just here to try to explain what I've been studying. And if Pablo said one day that success has always protected him, I would add that he was the one to create success. He was in control. I hope. Thank you. I hope that my English was good and that you could understand my words.
Yeah. I think his English was wonderful, because frankly, I could listen to him say my name all day long. So beautiful. So we'll take a few questions. If anyone has a question, we'd love to entertain it now. Someone? Yes, Shannon. So I'll repeat that because we didn't get the mic to Shannon quite quick enough. But the piece that you appreciate the most of his work, and why you like it.
Of course, I would say that I have a special interest for the portrait of my grandmother, Marie-Thérèse, or my mother, Maya. This period is very intense, and I have a personal link. But as anybody, I can say that he has been extremely talented in every way he was creating. I was at the exhibition of the MoMA collection nowadays at the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris. It was about 2 weeks ago. And there is a huge painting from the pink period. It's a boy who is holding a horse, and it's absolutely fabulous. And Pablo at that time was 24, 25 years old. So it's always complicated. But because Pablo was so creative, I would say that there is always a Picasso for everybody. That's a good point.
Anyone else?
There's a lady.
So the Guernica is one of his most famous pieces, and since it shows the pain and suffering of war, I was just wondering what he thought about the social effects of his work, and how, I guess...
the social effect coming,
yeah.
For example, from Guernica.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pablo was very concerned about the people. First, as a young artist, he considered that being a painter was something, so it was not something speaking about a hobby or just an amusement. He was telling everybody, I'm going to work. And through his success, he has always tried to help other artists. I was mentioning young photographers by helping them with a camera and a subject, but he was also trying to help friends. And after he experienced, let's say, the rich life in the 20s, mostly because of his wife Olga was experienced and educated and wanted this type of bourgeois life, he came back to a very simple life. Whatever, he was making a lot of money by selling his artworks. He was always helping people with money, with time, and he had always a very big social conscience. And you mentioned Guernica, but there are always artworks during the Second World War, and after there was also the Korean conflict, when he was showing what he thought about that. And speaking about the Communist Party in France, at the time Communist Party was very important, He was always trying to be with the people and not with the leaders of the party, especially after he understood that there were some problems with the Stalin regime.
Threat of photography. I was wondering, how do you feel about the development of the digital age, and do you consider the digital age actually art, or if it has completed, killing off traditional art in a way?
You know, in the little video, Pablo was asked about television as a medium for creativity, and he would have been probably very creative. So you mean the digital as a process of creation? Like photography was for paintings. I'm sure that there will be always artists inventing and inspired by new ideas. I always think that an artwork is probably on one sense an idea, a good idea, and on the other sense a kind of excellence in achievement. So the electronics, the computers, the digital creation can be bad friends, giving you the idea that you are an artist because you can push the buttons. So I'm sure that young artists will always have a way to control the technique and to make it original. Are you thinking about the video, for example, when you speak about digital creation?
Less video, more just like digital reproduction of art, like creating digital images from scratch. It's not a physical technique in a sense.
Again, at the Vuitton Foundation in Paris, they have a floor with Japanese artists who have developed kind of computerized video. It seems easy when you look at it, but in fact it's extremely complicated and extremely poetic. You have to be a millennial to understand that, because for me it was complicated. I had to watch it 2 or 3 times to understand what was happening. And this is probably the magic of an artwork, is that what you feel, not what you try to prove.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
I just wondered if those are dramatic years in science, in discovery, and the changing the way the world was perceived. Did you see any reflections in his art that had any influence by those developments?
You mean Picasso influenced by?
Science. By science.
By science. You mean because we've seen a picture of Albert Einstein? No, I don't think that Pablo Picasso was influenced by science, because he was more into a recreation of reality, not trying to understand. In fact, Pablo Picasso is not a painter of abstraction. He needs a subject, a woman, a man, a landscape, an object. And he tries to see how is it possible to see something different than just the actual reality. So he's more into exploring the present than to think about the abstraction of the future. The image of Albert Einstein visiting an artwork of Pablo Picasso, and behind Einstein there was a kind of cubist sculpture, is funny because it's really the meeting of 2 worlds, but maybe they're not so a stranger to each other. But for Pablo Picasso, it was more like a genius, a natural genius, not driven by any kind of science.
Maybe we do 2. Otherwise, I will hand it over to you today.
Did you ever paint?
Ha. Okay. First thing, genius is not transferable. Don't try. Second, when I was at the high school, I was in the drawing class, trying to do my best. I remember I was using a ruler to do a round, a circle. It was bizarre. But all my professors for years were telling me, oh, it's very nice, it's really nice. And they were showing to the classroom saying, it's nice, and we know why. Yeah. So I was trying to be normal with my friends after the class, to tell them she's totally cuckoo, forget about that. And at the end, before the baccalaureate, which is the final exam after the 10th or 12th grade for you, we have a report from the teacher, and on drawings, I had an A+. I was ready for the Met Museum. So what I did, I took the option of a drawing to get more points for the final exam. And the night before, I was dreaming about something. I was dreaming about a village, a village in Provence. So the morning, I took the subject. There was, a portrait. I said, a portrait. If I don't have my ruler, I cannot do a portrait. And the second one was a village in Provence. I say, this is a sign. My grandfather has sent me a sign. I'm going to have many points. So I did my little village with ink and with pastel colors. It was a nice village. I mean, it was not that bad. And we have you say notation on 20. So potentially I could have a 20 on 20 or 18 on 20. And I got a 3. I immediately stopped my career and I went to the law school, where I succeeded much better. And just to answer your question, I probably have the nose of my grandfather, maybe the eyes, but no, not the hands. Nothing. But of course, when you have an environment of creativity, you are probably influenced. And by being surrounded by people in the art world, probably artworks themselves, but also conversations about creation, it helps. And this is how I started my career after law in television and music business. So I was surrounded by artists without being an artist myself. Don't ask me for a signature Picasso, no hope. No hope.
On that note, we will close the conversation and invite you to come back, because Olivier has agreed to sign several of our books, and we will have that in the back in the lobby area. Thank you so much for coming this evening. We
Thank
enjoyed
you.
having you. Thank you.